Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the fog-draped streets of Victorian England, where insomnia wasn't just a nuisance, it was practically an epidemic. Imagine gaslights flickering dimly behind lace curtains, chimneys puffing like tired lungs into the sooty sky, and in every cramped parlor or grand four-poster bed, people lay awake, fretting. Not scrolling through phones, of course, just staring at the ceiling and wondering whether the pickled onions they had with supper were sabotaging their peace of mind. This is a time before sleep apps and weighted blankets. Back then, if you couldn't sleep, you turned to lettuce water, Pebbles in your bed, or possibly a spoonful of laudanum if things got really desperate. And they often did. The night wasn't your friend in the 1800s. It was a long, uncomfortable waiting room between one anxious day and the next. You might as well have been clock-watching on a boat headed nowhere. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there, unless you've already lost all concept of time, in which case, perfect. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk through a narrow London street where the fog clings like an old coat. Cobblestones click under your shoes, and the only light comes from a gas lamp's hesitant glow. Somewhere nearby, a cat yowls. Not out of hunger, just existential dread. This is the city that never sleeps, not because it's exciting, but because sleep, in the Victorian age, is maddeningly elusive. Doctors call it nervous sleeplessness. It's a polite way of saying everyone's stress is eating them alive. The Industrial Revolution has your mind whirring like a loom. Too many numbers, too much smoke, not enough quiet. You lie in bed and wonder, is it the fumes from the lamp? Is your pillow stuffed too firm? Or maybe it's all the walking you didn't do today, thanks to that infernal rain. This era isn't exactly known for restfulness. The concept of sleep hygiene doesn't exist yet. You eat dinner at 9, wash it down with port, and wonder why your heart's racing in bed. You try to pray it away, or blame the maid, or suspect your mattress has some vengeful curse sewn into the lining. But mostly, you lie awake in stiff nightclothes, tangled in woolen sheets, listening to your own heartbeat like it's some far-off military march. Historians still argue whether insomnia became more common during this period or simply more talked about. Some say it was the proliferation of cheap paper that gave rise to personal diaries, places where ordinary people could finally complain, in glorious detail, about not sleeping. Others think it was the rise of the middle class, suddenly burdened with all the anxieties of keeping up appearances and affording indoor plumbing. One known fact, Queen Victoria herself reportedly had trouble sleeping, though this may have had more to do with royal duties and less with indigestion. Still, when the Queen can't sleep, you can bet the common folk feel justified in their own nighttime woes. So you, average Victorian person, start to look for answers. Maybe it's something in the air. Literally. Gas lamps are a relatively new addition, and there are whispers, mostly from people wearing waistcoats, that the fumes mess with your brain. Some claim gaslight exposure causes nervous excitability, a term that could mean anything from sleeplessness to general vibes. You try snuffing out the lamp early. It helps a bit, but now the room is cold and smells faintly of last week's mutton. You try opening a window, but the air smells like horse sweat and chimney soot. A win either way. Still, you're not alone in your frustration. All around England, people are trying bizarre methods to get some rest. Some swear by counting backwards from 1,000, others by rubbing their feet with camphor oil until they tingle. And then there are the outliers, like the man in Devon who claimed he could only fall asleep if someone read aloud from an agricultural almanac. There's something eerily modern about their struggle. They didn't have screens, but their minds raced just the same. Maybe even more so. You had to remember everything. Appointments, debts, what your neighbor's second cousin said about you at the bakery last Thursday. It all played on loop when the lights went out. And then there's the silence. Absolute, enveloping, suspicious silence. Unless you live in the city, where the occasional street cry, eels, fresh eels, might briefly comfort you, or terrify you. Honestly, it's a toss-up. You roll over. The bed creaks in protest. Your nightshirt itches. You briefly consider sleeping on the floor. You wonder if anyone else is awake, lying in the dark and resenting every tick of the mantle clock. Probably. Misery may not love company, but sleeplessness certainly does. Of course, eventually, you'll find a remedy. Or at least a routine. But not yet. Not tonight. For now, all you have is your restless body, your overstuffed mind, and the faint, desperate hope that the next idea someone has, no matter how odd, might just work. So begins your journey through the curious, often laughable world of Victorian sleep science. Don't worry, you probably won't survive it. But then again, that's kind of the point. You're still lying there, wide awake under the heavy folds of your woolen blankets, when someone mentions it at tea the next morning, casually, as though it were perfectly normal. Have you tried boiling lettuce? You pause with your teacup halfway to your lips. Boiling lettuce. Yes, yes, they say with great authority. In water. Drink it warm before bed. It soothes the nerves. Works wonders for Mrs. Biddle, you know. Ever since her cat died. You nod slowly, as if this isn't the strangest sentence you've ever heard, but later that evening, curiosity gets the better of you. So you fetch a floppy head of romaine from the pantry. Romaine was the preferred variety, naturally, and begin the gentle, medicinal process of making what can only be described as salad tea. The boiling takes longer than expected. The smell isn't exactly comforting, sort of like overcooked spinach left in a sun-warmed tin. But this is science, you tell yourself. Herbalists have recommended lettuce for centuries, after all. Galen was a fan. So was Pliny the Elder. And you always trusted a man with elder in his name. Victorians weren't just making things up. Well, not all the time. Lettuce does contain lactucarium, a milky, slightly sedative compound. The same stuff that makes cut lettuce ooze a white sap when it's wilting in your fridge today. In larger doses, it can cause drowsiness, especially if consumed on an empty stomach and followed by prayer and a lack of lighting. Some 19th century physicians even recommended mixing lettuce water with a few drops of vinegar and a pinch of nutmeg. If you were fancy, you might add a few shavings of orange zest. But let's be honest, no one had oranges in Stoke-on-Trent in January. You pour the hot, greenish liquid into a chipped mug and sip. It tastes unconvincing, like tea brewed in a cabbage streams. But after a while, something unexpected happens. Not sleep, exactly, but a kind of warm fog settles in your chest. You stop clenching your jaw. You stop rehearsing arguments you might have with your aunt next Thursday. It's not sleep, but it's adjacent. Historians still argue whether the lettuce cure actually worked or whether it was just the Victorian version of a bedtime placebo. Some point to diaries where people swear by its calming effects. Others suggest it was merely the ritual itself, boiling, pouring, sipping, that helped slow the body down. But lettuce water wasn't the only leafy remedy on the scene. There was also lettuce wine, which, yes, is exactly what it sounds like. The French swore by it. The English, ever suspicious of the French, tried it anyway. It involved steeping lettuce in fortified wine for several days and sipping the dark, vegetal results. A terrible idea, you think, until you remember that this was an age when people also bathed in vinegar and rubbed radishes behind their ears for congestion. In some rural homes, grandmothers swore by compresses made from wilted lettuce leaves laid gently over the eyes. It draws out the heat, they'd mutter, like some culinary witch doctor. You try it once, just to be thorough. It feels weirdly comforting. The cool, damp leaves block out the lamp glow and smell faintly of someone's forgotten picnic. Not all lettuce was created equal in the sleep wars. Iceberg, the crunchy upstart of the lettuce world, was considered useless. No sedative sap. No street cred. Romaine was king. Cos lettuce, if you were posh. Wild lettuce, the rough, bitter kind that grew in hedgerows, was considered the most potent, but few people could stomach it. It tasted like if bitterness were a vegetable. Still, apothecaries sold it in little brown bottles with labels that promised relief from agitations of the nervous kind. There's something about the idea of lettuce as medicine that fits so neatly into the Victorian worldview. Nature, after all, was a moral teacher. If a vegetable could make you sleep, perhaps it could also make you better, more restrained, more delicate, less inclined to spontaneous interpretive dance. And besides, lettuce was cheap. Unlike laudanum, it didn't lead to social scandal or sudden fainting spells at the opera. You could grow it in your garden, pick it after supper, and be sipping it by 10 p.m. No need for appointments or quackish doctors with pomaded hair. Some newspapers even published recipes for lettuce toddy, a non-alcoholic blend of boiled lettuce, milk, and honey. Mothers gave it to fretful children. Spinsters took it after long afternoons embroidering frustration into floral patterns. Men pretended it was gross while secretly sipping it by the fire. But not everyone was convinced. One London medical journal called it laughable leaf lore. Another posited that any benefit likely came from self-deception or the natural fatigue of reading Dickens by candlelight. Still, night after night, the lettuce leaf cure made its rounds. You picture a street full of houses, windows glowing faintly, each containing someone sitting upright in bed, sipping from a hot cup of cabbagey calm, hoping, just hoping, that maybe tonight would be the night they drifted off without counting how many candles they'd burned through that month. And sometimes, they did. Tonight, you decide to escalate your sleep strategy. The lettuce water helped a bit, sure, but not enough to face another day of polite yawns and accidental dozing during sermons. At the chemist today, the assistant mentioned something else. Something harder. You know, he said, lowering his voice, some folks swear by Pebbles. You blinked. Pebbles? He nodded. Flat ones, from the sea. Under the mattress, or under your back. Aligns the humors, they say. And so, here you are, kneeling awkwardly beside your bed, arranging a small family of cool, smooth pebbles beneath your sheets like you're about to host a seance for very small, very sleepy spirits. It seems absurd. And yet, not completely. Victorian England had a soft spot for these kinds of tactile, homespun cures. They fit into the broader trend of natural alignment. Not just spinal, but cosmic. This was an era that adored phrenology, magnetic therapies, and bathing in cold water until your sins gave up and left your pores. Placing pebbles beneath the mattress was sometimes called gravity grounding. Not officially, of course, that's our modern term. But the idea, loosely translated, was that the earth had a calming pull, and that stones, having nestled in the earth longer than you, knew how to bring you down to their level. In a good way. Not like when your neighbor brings you down by commenting on your wallpaper. Some arranged the stones in circles. Others used one single pebble tucked beneath the pillow. A few spiritualists swore by laying them in a row beneath the spine, carefully calibrated like a railway. One eccentric pamphlet you might have skimmed at the lending library claimed the right stone could retune the etheric frequency of the sleep state. Historians still argue whether this was born from spiritualist trends or if it piggybacked on older folk traditions, pagan practices where stones were used to ward off nightmares or mischievous spirits. In certain corners of Cornwall, for instance, villagers believed that a white stone under the left heel could prevent night terrors. In Wales, the more dramatic lore suggested a handful of pebbles placed under the mattress could distract the Ceffyl Dwr, a ghostly night horse, from trampling your dreams. Tonight, you try your own version. A careful row of pebbles under the small of your back. Not quite comfortable, but oddly reassuring. You lie very still. You try to picture the ocean they came from, though you know they probably came from a bucket behind the fishmongers. Still, imagination is powerful. And here's the odd thing, the discomfort does something. It breaks the cycle of thought. You're no longer turning over the argument you had last week, or worrying about whether Mr. Hollingsworth suspects you borrowed his coal tongs. You're just aware. The pressure in your back is grounding, in every sense of the word. Victorians loved this type of solution, a ritual, tactile, slightly silly thing that felt like effort. Remedies had to be earned. If it was too easy, it probably wasn't working. You could say the same about most of Victorian life, really. Of course, not everyone had the same kind of pebbles. The very wealthy, those with time, disposable income, and a flair for drama, might use semi-precious stones. Jasper, for example, was considered soothing. Amethyst was protective. Malachite? Well, some believed it encouraged dreams of a mild erotic nature, though no one said this part aloud, at least not where the vicar could hear. In certain spiritualist circles, there were elaborate bedstone maps, where believers laid out patterns of stones on the mattress like a nighttime feng shui. Each position corresponded with a part of the body, and, naturally, a celestial object. You could sleep in the arms of Orion, or with the healing vibes of Venus tickling your knees. But even the simplest stone could do the trick. One rural woman reportedly swore by keeping a river pebble in her hand while she fell asleep. She claimed it slowed her heartbeat. Possibly because it was cold. Possibly because gripping a rock is surprisingly tiring. You try that, too. It's a little silly, but also kind of sweet. Like holding hands with the earth. Your fingers curl around it. You listen to the distant ticking of your wall clock. You imagine your heartbeat syncing with the quiet mass of stone. It doesn't knock you out, exactly, but it pulls you away from your endless spirals of thought. The modern mind might scoff. But think about it. We clutch phones in bed now, scrolling until our eyes glaze. Maybe a pebble is just an analog form of comfort. Less addictive, more mineral. There's something humbling about the practice. You, the insomniac Victorian, not rushing to the apothecary, not pacing the floor or gnashing your teeth, but just placing a small stone under your shoulder blade and trusting in its 1,000-year-old calm. Of course, there were detractors. One doctor in Manchester famously called the pebble cure a fantasy of the weak-spirited and fanciful, which, honestly, is also how he described most forms of music and anything French. He later admitted to sleeping with a brick under his bed for spinal discipline, so take that with a grain of stone. Some enterprising vendors even began selling bed stones at markets, washed, polished, and packed in velvet pouches. You could choose your texture, smooth for serenity, jagged for alert dreaming, whatever that means, and mixed bags for those indecisive about their afflictions. You imagine yourself browsing these pouches in a musty shop, bins full of whispering stones, each promising a slightly better night. No refunds. But who would want one? Tonight, you fall asleep, not quickly, but gently, with one palm resting on a warm blanket, and the other holding a pebble from someone else's shoreline. You're still lying there, wide awake under the heavy folds of your woolen blankets, when someone mentions it at tea the next morning, casually, as though it were perfectly normal. Have you tried boiling lettuce? You pause with your teacup halfway to your lips. Boiling lettuce. Yes, yes, they say with great authority. In water. Drink it warm before bed. It soothes the nerves. Works wonders for Mrs. Biddle, you know. Ever since her cat died. You nod slowly, as if this isn't the strangest sentence you've ever heard, but later that evening, curiosity gets the better of you. So you fetch a floppy head of romaine from the pantry. Romaine was the preferred variety, naturally, and begin the gentle, medicinal process of making what can only be described as salad tea. The boiling takes longer than expected. The smell isn't exactly comforting, sort of like overcooked spinach left in a sun-warmed tin. But this is science, you tell yourself. Herbalists have recommended lettuce for centuries, after all. Galen was a fan. So was Pliny the Elder. And you always trusted a man with elder in his name. Victorians weren't just making things up. Well, not all the time. Lettuce does contain lactucarium, a milky, slightly sedative compound. The same stuff that makes cut lettuce ooze a white sap when it's wilting in your fridge today. In larger doses, it can cause drowsiness, especially if consumed on an empty stomach and followed by prayer and a lack of lighting. Some 19th century physicians even recommended mixing lettuce water with a few drops of vinegar and a pinch of nutmeg. If you were fancy, you might add a few shavings of orange zest. But let's be honest, no one had oranges in Stoke-on-Trent in January. You pour the hot, greenish liquid into a chipped mug and sip. It tastes unconvincing, like tea brewed in a cabbage streams. But after a while, something unexpected happens. Not sleep, exactly, but a kind of warm fog settles in your chest. You stop clenching your jaw. You stop rehearsing arguments you might have with your aunt next Thursday. It's not sleep, but it's adjacent. Historians still argue whether the lettuce cure actually worked or whether it was just the Victorian version of a bedtime placebo. Some point to diaries where people swear by its calming effects. Others suggest it was merely the ritual itself, boiling, pouring, sipping, that helped slow the body down. But lettuce water wasn't the only leafy remedy on the scene. There was also lettuce wine, which, yes, is exactly what it sounds like. The French swore by it. The English, ever suspicious of the French, tried it anyway. It involved steeping lettuce in fortified wine for several days and sipping the dark, vegetal results. A terrible idea, you think, until you remember that this was an age when people also bathed in vinegar and rubbed radishes behind their ears for congestion. In some rural homes, grandmothers swore by compresses made from wilted lettuce leaves laid gently over the eyes. It draws out the heat, they'd mutter, like some culinary witch doctor. You try it once, just to be thorough. It feels weirdly comforting. The cool, damp leaves block out the lamp glow and smell faintly of someone's forgotten picnic. Not all lettuce was created equal in the sleep wars. Iceberg, the crunchy upstart of the lettuce world, was considered useless. No sedative sap. No street cred. Romaine was king. Cos lettuce, if you were posh. Wild lettuce, the rough, bitter kind that grew in hedgerows, was considered the most potent, but few people could stomach it. It tasted like if bitterness were a vegetable. Still, apothecaries sold it in little brown bottles with labels that promised relief from agitations of the nervous kind. There's something about the idea of lettuce as medicine that fits so neatly into the Victorian worldview. Nature, after all, was a moral teacher. If a vegetable could make you sleep, perhaps it could also make you better, more restrained, more delicate, less inclined to spontaneous interpretive dance. And besides, lettuce was cheap. Unlike laudanum, it didn't lead to social scandal or sudden fainting spells at the opera. You could grow it in your garden, pick it after supper, and be sipping it by 10 p.m. No need for appointments or quackish doctors with pomaded hair. Some newspapers even published recipes for lettuce toddy, a non-alcoholic blend of boiled lettuce, milk, and honey. Mothers gave it to fretful children. Spinsters took it after long afternoons embroidering frustration into floral patterns. Men pretended it was gross while secretly sipping it by the fire. But not everyone was convinced. One London medical journal called it laughable leaf lore. Another posited that any benefit likely came from self-deception or the natural fatigue of reading Dickens by candlelight. Still, night after night, the lettuce leaf cure made its rounds. You picture a street full of houses, windows glowing faintly, each containing someone sitting upright in bed, sipping from a hot cup of cabbagey calm, hoping, just hoping, that maybe tonight would be the night they drifted off without counting how many candles they'd burned through that month. And sometimes, they did. Tonight, you decide to escalate your sleep strategy. The lettuce water helped a bit, sure, but not enough to face another day of polite yawns and accidental dozing during sermons. At the chemist today, the assistant mentioned something else. Something harder. You know, he said, lowering his voice, some folks swear by Pebbles. You blinked. Pebbles? He nodded. Flat ones, from the sea. Under the mattress, or under your back. Aligns the humors, they say. And so, here you are, kneeling awkwardly beside your bed, arranging a small family of cool, smooth pebbles beneath your sheets like you're about to host a seance for very small, very sleepy spirits. It seems absurd. And yet, not completely. Victorian England had a soft spot for these kinds of tactile, homespun cures. They fit into the broader trend of natural alignment. Not just spinal, but cosmic. This was an era that adored phrenology, magnetic therapies, and bathing in cold water until your sins gave up and left your pores. Placing pebbles beneath the mattress was sometimes called gravity grounding. Not officially, of course, that's our modern term. But the idea, loosely translated, was that the earth had a calming pull, and that stones, having nestled in the earth longer than you, knew how to bring you down to their level. In a good way. Not like when your neighbor brings you down by commenting on your wallpaper. Some arranged the stones in circles. Others used one single pebble tucked beneath the pillow. A few spiritualists swore by laying them in a row beneath the spine, carefully calibrated like a railway. One eccentric pamphlet you might have skimmed at the lending library claimed the right stone could retune the etheric frequency of the sleep state. Historians still argue whether this was born from spiritualist trends or if it piggybacked on older folk traditions, pagan practices where stones were used to ward off nightmares or mischievous spirits. In certain corners of Cornwall, for instance, villagers believed that a white stone under the left heel could prevent night terrors. In Wales, the more dramatic lore suggested a handful of pebbles placed under the mattress could distract the Ceffyl Dwr, a ghostly night horse, from trampling your dreams. Tonight, you try your own version. A careful row of pebbles under the small of your back. Not quite comfortable, but oddly reassuring. You lie very still, You try to picture the ocean they came from, though you know they probably came from a bucket behind the fishmongers. Still, imagination is powerful. And here's the odd thing: the discomfort does something. It breaks the cycle of thought. You're no longer turning over the argument you had last week, or worrying about whether Mr. Hollingsworth suspects you borrowed his coal tongs. You're just aware. The pressure in your back is grounding, in every sense of the word. Victorians loved this type of solution, a ritual, tactile, slightly silly thing that felt like effort. Remedies had to be earned. If it was too easy, it probably wasn't working. You could say the same about most of Victorian life, really. Of course, not everyone had the same kind of pebbles. The very wealthy, those with time, disposable income, and a flair for drama, might use semi-precious stones. Jasper, for example, was considered soothing. Amethyst was protective. Malachite? Well, some believed it encouraged dreams of a mild erotic nature, though no one said this part aloud, at least not where the vicar could hear. In certain spiritualist circles, there were elaborate bedstone maps, where believers laid out patterns of stones on the mattress like a nighttime feng shui. Each position corresponded with a part of the body, and, naturally, a celestial object. You could sleep in the arms of Orion, or with the healing vibes of Venus tickling your knees. But even the simplest stone could do the trick. One rural woman reportedly swore by keeping a river pebble in her hand while she fell asleep. She claimed it slowed her heartbeat. Possibly because it was cold. Possibly because gripping a rock is surprisingly tiring. You try that, too. It's a little silly, but also kind of sweet. Like holding hands with the earth. Your fingers curl around it. You listen to the distant ticking of your wall clock. You imagine your heartbeat syncing with the quiet mass of stone. It doesn't knock you out, exactly, but it pulls you away from your endless spirals of thought. The modern mind might scoff. But think about it. We clutch phones in bed now, scrolling until our eyes glaze. Maybe a pebble is just an analog form of comfort. Less addictive, more mineral. There's something humbling about the practice. You, the insomniac Victorian, not rushing to the apothecary, not pacing the floor or gnashing your teeth, but just placing a small stone under your shoulder blade and trusting in its 1,000-year-old calm. Of course, there were detractors. One doctor in Manchester famously called the pebble cure a fantasy of the weak-spirited and fanciful, which, honestly, is also how he described most forms of music and anything French. He later admitted to sleeping with a brick under his bed for spinal discipline, so take that with a grain of stone. Some enterprising vendors even began selling bed stones at markets, washed, polished, and packed in velvet pouches. You could choose your texture, smooth for serenity, jagged for alert dreaming, whatever that means, and mixed bags for those indecisive about their afflictions. You imagine yourself browsing these pouches in a musty shop, bins full of whispering stones, each promising a slightly better night. No refunds. But who would want one? Tonight, you fall asleep, not quickly, but gently, with one palm resting on a warm blanket, and the other holding a pebble from someone else's shoreline. The next morning, you wake up feeling not refreshed, exactly, but less haunted. As if the shadows behind your eyes took the night off. You stretch, and one of the pebbles rolls out from under your back like a lazy beetle. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't. Either way, you'll take it. But of course, Victorians didn't stop with lettuce and pebbles. That would have been far too reasonable. At your neighbor's house, Mrs. Penelope Witherspoon, she of the tightly wound bun and 6 ceramic owls, someone brings up an herbalist from Devon who's now prescribing foot fumigations. You perk up, intrigued and mildly alarmed. The concept, you're told, is simple. Let aromatic steam waft gently over your feet before bed, and you'll sleep like a gently purring tabby. So that night, you try it. The ritual begins with a kettle. You fill it, boil it, and pour the steaming water over a bowl packed with dried herbs, lavender, chamomile, and mugwort, if you're lucky. If you're less lucky, it's just crushed mint and whatever dried leaves you found behind the pantry jars. You place your feet, bare and hopeful, on a small wooden rack over the bowl, letting the herbal steam rise in fragrant curls. And you sit. The warmth creeps up your calves. The scent fills your nose, your hair, your imagination. You picture yourself floating in a field somewhere. The only sound? Bees, distant bells, and maybe a goat yawning philosophically. This wasn't an invention you learn, but rather a revival of older folk practices common across Europe and even in parts of the Ottoman Empire. There's something universally comforting about hot water and nice smells. Even better if it's gently attacking your feet. Historians still argue whether the foot fumigation craze was spurred by actual medical insight or just clever marketing by herbalists who needed new income after leeches fell out of fashion. Some noted that feet are full of nerve endings, and stimulating them might indeed calm the rest of the body. Others said it was nonsense wrapped in lavender. But the Victorians didn't care. They adored ritual. They found power in the method itself. The boiling, the sitting, the long exhale. If it smelled like a meadow and kept you from climbing the curtains at 2 a.m., it was worth doing. In Bath, a particularly fashionable sleep salon offered foot fume sessions complete with harp music and a complimentary barley sugar. You reclined in a velvet chair while attendants swirled aromatic steam around your ankles like you were royalty, very sleepy, slightly damp royalty. You, of course, recreate this in your bedroom with less flair. No velvet, no harp. Just you, a chipped bowl, and the unshakable hope that mugwort will do what 6 hours of staring at the ceiling could not. The sensations are strangely hypnotic. Steam hits your skin, and your mind drifts. You start thinking about nothing in particular, what bees dream about, whether moths get lonely, how long it would take to embroider an entire duvet with tiny sleeping hedgehogs. You smile. That's a good sign. Then your feet get too hot, and you jump a little, nearly tipping the bowl. But you recover. Everything's fine. You're relaxed. Just slightly boiled. In some circles, the steam was infused with salt or vinegar. Salt, they said, drew out fatigue. Vinegar was said to tame the madness of the nerves. You try both. The vinegar is pungent. It smells like pickling your dreams. But oddly, it does seem to cut through the clutter in your brain, as if your thoughts are being disinfected one by one. Mrs. Witherspoon also swears by a foot massage with camphorated oil afterward. You give it a go, mostly to avoid the lingering smell of warm salad dressing. The camphor tingles. Your toes feel like they've had a minor revelation. And then, here's the kicker, there were those who claimed foot fumigations could treat everything from anxiety to heartbreak to melancholy of the musical kind. One pamphlet even suggested they helped one's dreams become tidier, more sequential, and less inclined toward abstract shadows. You don't know about all that. But you do know this. By the time you're back in bed, your feet are warm, your limbs feel light, and your pillow no longer seems like the enemy. The thoughts that usually crawl across your ceiling have paused, as if unsure whether to bother you. There's a lot of charm in this cure. It's gentle, kind. It doesn't judge you for having a nervous system that prefers moonlight panic. It just steams your feet like dim sum and sends you to bed with fragrant toes. And even if the effect is 90% imaginary, That's still 90% more peaceful than last week's failed experiment with cold sponge baths and Gregorian chants. As you begin to drift, one final thought floats by. If this works, you'll send a thank you note to the mysterious Devon herbalist. Or at least think about sending one sometime after breakfast. It's now the third night of your dedicated war on sleeplessness, and you're becoming something of a connoisseur of odd rituals. You've steamed your toes. You've lain atop Pebbles. You've simmered lettuce like it's a Sunday roast. But you still wake in the wee hours, blinking at the ceiling and wondering whether the Queen ever has this problem. And tonight, the solution comes from an unexpected source, your cousin Cecil. Yes, that's Cecil, the one with the suspiciously long moustache and a fondness for German opera sung loudly at dinner parties. Cecil, it turns out, has been sleeping like a spoiled cat lately. His secret? Weighted bedding, he says with a twinkle. But not what you're thinking. He doesn't mean blankets stitched with sand or lead pellets, though, knowing Cecil, that wouldn't be out of character. He means layering. A distinctly Victorian practice of piling on blankets, quilts, shawls, sometimes even coats, until one becomes too physically burdened to entertain intrusive thoughts. So tonight, you try it. You begin with your standard bedding, thin and scratchy but serviceable. Then comes the tartan shawl from Aunt Margaret, the paisley lap blanket you never liked, the heavy horsehair throw you once used as a picnic rug, and, finally, your great uncle's wartime coat. By the time you're finished, your bed looks less like a sleeping space and more like the outer wall of a linen cupboard. Sliding beneath this layered fortress, you feel immediately restrained. Not in a suffocating way, more like a polite cocooning. You can't toss, you can't turn. You can only submit. And that's the point. Victorians believed, some quite sincerely, that the weight itself could calm the restless nerves, anchoring the overactive mind. The effect wasn't entirely unfounded. Modern science calls it deep pressure stimulation. The Victorians called it tucking in with intent. Historians still argue whether this method emerged organically from necessity, drafty rooms, cold winters, moth-bitten insulation, or whether it had deeper psychological roots. Some claim it was mimicked from swaddling infants. Others suggest it was a reaction to the increasingly noisy urban world, a way to retreat not just from cold, but from the general clamor of modern life. And yes, modern in this case means the relentless sound of carriage wheels and the occasional street hawker yelling about eels. The weight starts to work faster than you expect. Not magically, but gently. Your limbs grow still. Your thoughts start to slow. You aren't floating anymore, you're held. There's something in this, you think. Something more than comfort. A soft compression of the self. The message it sends is clear. You are here, you are safe, and you needn't be anywhere else until at least sunrise. Even more curious are the materials. In poorer households, it was common to use sacks of grain, folded rugs, or even bundles of laundry as makeshift weight. In one memorable London boarding house, a lodger was said to have slept under 3 Bibles and a firewood basket, and swore it cured his involuntary midnight theological rumination. You find this oddly relatable. In fancier homes, the technique was elevated. Quilts were stitched with dense embroidery, sometimes weighted with polished stones or beads. Some even contained sachets of lavender and rose petals sewn between layers, adding scent to the sensation. These were not merely blankets. They were sedatives in textile form. Of course, this had side effects. One London doctor recorded a rise in smother complaints, in which patients awoke confused and convinced they'd been crushed by ghosts. One woman even insisted she'd been visited nightly by the spirit of her aunt, who smelled faintly of boiled wool and disapproval. But even skeptics had to admit, the results were promising. People reported falling asleep faster, waking less, and dreaming of calmer things. Not adventures or nightmares, but simple scenes, gardens, embroidery, long walks, biscuits. You aren't quite dreaming yet. But you're not thinking either. And that's its own kind of miracle. Beneath your mountain of mismatched blankets, you feel vaguely like a hibernating badger. And, as it turns out, that's exactly the vibe. In rural circles, old folk medicine often compared troubled sleep to animals disturbed mid-hibernation. The solution? Mimic the burrow. Pile on warmth. Keep still. Wait for peace to find you. As you lie there, pinned by your own quilted choices, you consider how far you've come. 3 days ago, you were pacing the floor like a Victorian Hamlet. Now, you're wrapped in half your household and blinking slowly at a flickering candle. Your mind starts to wander, not in that anxious, ping-pong ball way, but in slow, heavy arcs. You think about that horsehair throw. Where did it come from? Was it always this itchy? Has it always smelled faintly of pipe tobacco? You'll never know. And you don't need to. Because in the quiet that follows, your breath deepens. Your limbs stay still. And the only thought left is this. Maybe Cecil was right. For once. It's now the 4th evening, and your bed looks increasingly like a Victorian rummage sale. You've got pebbles in a sock, lettuce dregs in a jar, and more layers than a 7-tiered wedding cake. But sleep, while closer, still hovers just out of reach, like a cat that will only sit on your lap after you stand up. So tonight, you wander. Not physically, your body stays put, but mentally, you let yourself drift toward the strangest insomnia cure yet, thought restriction boxes. It starts with a leaflet slipped under your door by a mysterious neighbor known only as Miss Glenda. The leaflet is yellowed and smells of cinnamon. On the front, in curly script, it reads, "Box the mind, and sleep shall follow," which sounds more like a riddle than a remedy. But inside, it details a method some Victorians swore by. You construct a small mental box, a visual container, and whenever a thought tries to pop up, you picture placing it inside the box and gently shutting the lid. Over and over again. As if your brain were a fussy drawer that just needs organizing. So tonight, you build your box. It's mahogany, naturally. Polished to a sheen. Lined with crushed velvet and maybe a tiny brass latch. And the first thought to go inside? Worrying about your unpaid milk bill. You fold that worry up like a pair of socks and place it gently inside. The second? That nagging recollection of something you said awkwardly at last Tuesday's dinner. In it goes, squished next to the milk bill and sealed in with an imaginary shish. The practice is soothing, almost hypnotic. And it turns out, Victorians were quite obsessed with the mental hygiene of bedtime. They believed, perhaps correctly, that insomnia wasn't just a bodily affliction, but an overactive moral and intellectual condition. One overburdened with improper thoughts, overstimulated by gaslight readings and too many worries about social decorum. Historians still argue whether these thought box techniques were born of Eastern influence, borrowed, perhaps, from Buddhist or Hindu meditative traditions that filtered into Europe via colonial contact, or simply the byproduct of an increasingly anxious middle class trying to discipline their minds the same way they polished their silverware. You feel oddly proud of your box. It's getting full, crammed with grocery lists, forgotten birthdays, questionable life choices, and the very specific regret of not learning the lute when you had the chance. But you keep going, because the rhythm is calming. And with every metaphorical placement, your breathing slows just a little more. There were even physical representations of this practice. Victorian worry dolls or talismans, often crafted in the likeness of angels, miniature animals, or sleepy children, were sold as bedtime companions. You'd whisper your thoughts to them, then tuck them under your pillow. Out of sight, out of mind. You don't have a doll, but you do have a small ceramic duck inherited from your grandmother. It's got a chip on its beak and a look of eternal concern. Tonight, it'll do. You whisper to it gently, just a word or two, and nestle it beside your pillow. The effect is oddly grounding. Silly, yes, but grounding. One fringe pamphlet from 1887 even recommended drawing your mental box before bed, with little compartments labeled worries, regrets, future plans that require no midnight attention, and thoughts about biscuits. You briefly consider making your own version tomorrow. Maybe frame it. But for now, you return to your internal chest. You imagine each intrusive idea as an object, a boot, a postage stamp, a soggy tea cake. As each one arrives, you open the lid, place it inside, and, here's the crucial bit, thank it before closing the box again. The Victorians believed this politeness toward your own thoughts was key. You weren't banishing them. You were storing them for later, with grace. Like a librarian shelving slightly misbehaving books. After a while, fewer thoughts show up. And those that do seem slower, dimmer, like echoes of earlier thoughts rather than fresh ones. Your mind begins to quiet, not because it's empty, but because it feels handled. Organized. You've Marie Kondo'd your brain before that was a thing. The final image before you doze is that polished little box, shut tight, warm from your hands, resting gently on the bedside of your imagination. And next to it, the duck, solemnly guarding your dreams. By the fifth night, you've accepted something profound. Victorians had no chill, but they did have creativity. Because just when you think you've uncovered every lettuce brood, pebble-lace trick in their insomnia arsenal, another peculiar remedy flutters into view, this time in the form of bedroom choreography. Yes, that's a thing. According to several dusty manuals with far too many ampersands in their titles, sleep didn't just happen because you lay down. Oh no! It had to be courted, much like a bashful suitor. And that meant creating the exact right pre-sleep ballet, specific sequences of undressing, grooming, and lying in bed at precise angles, all performed with the care of a tea ceremony. So tonight, you decide to try the full routine. Not out of desperation, well, okay, partly out of desperation, but also because it promises something more than sleep, a kind of sleepy ritual elegance. You start with your slippers, removing them slowly, right then left, placing them neatly beside your bed as instructed. No flinging. No toe kicking. Next, you brush your hair. 50 strokes, evenly counted. Not because it's tangled, but because Victorians believed that repetitive brushing soothed the cranial humus. Historians still argue whether this was based on actual nerve calming or just the innate pleasure of doing something mildly tedious at bedtime. Then there's the nightshirt. Not just thrown on. Folded first. Smoothed. Inhaled gently. Then draped over your shoulders as if you're about to give a speech to the Royal Society in your pajamas. You lie down, but not all at once. You sit. You lower yourself onto your side. Then slowly extend your legs, adjusting the blankets without a crinkle. One hand rests across your middle. The other tucks under your cheek. This is the position. Known in one manual as the gentleman's repose, and in another, less poetically, as the third contemplative posture. It feels slightly absurd. You half expect someone to applaud. But you must admit, it's also soothing. There's something powerful about preparing for sleep as if it matters. As if it's not just the thing you collapse into when your phone battery dies, but a sacred, daily ritual. And to the Victorians, it was sacred. Bedtime was the border between two moral worlds, the public and the private. And you were expected to cross that threshold with grace. The right pajamas, the right mindset, the right number of pre-sleep yawns. 4 was ideal. 7 suggested unresolved spiritual guilt. Some guides even prescribed what to think about in those final moments. Acceptable topics included pleasant memories, simple arithmetic, the geography of the British Isles, and, in one unintentionally charming suggestion, the happy idea of a goose waddling home. Naturally, you picked the goose. Her name is Edna now. And she's very punctual. You imagine her tapping softly along cobblestones in little leather booties. She honks exactly once, flaps her wings politely, and settles beneath a hedge. She sleeps easily. Why wouldn't she? Edna has boundaries. One fringe expert from 1863 swore by reciting foreign vocabulary before bed, something about redirecting linguistic focus to non-emotional terrain. So you whisper a few Latin phrases to yourself. Somnus, amicus fidelis. Sleep, the faithful friend. It actually works better than expected. Not because you understand it, but because your brain is too tired to argue. The point is rhythm, sequence, repetition. Your body, lulled by routine, starts to signal the brain, the show's over. Curtains drawn, lights dimmed, time to stop. Even your heart rate slows. Not from magic, but from predictability. That strange comfort in knowing what happens next and what doesn't. You add a final touch, the optional but highly recommended bedtime aroma. Not lavender this time, but boiled apple peel, suggested in an 1874 Homemaker's column as a wholesome fragrance conducive to dreams of orchard peace. So you place a little dish beside your bed with a warm slice of apple, hoping for that dream. It's faint, but there. Sweet. Slightly tart. Like a memory you can almost taste. You sigh. The blanket shifts. The goose snores. And you realize, perhaps for the first time all week, you are, if not quite asleep, then at least content. On the 6th night, you're ready to raise the stakes, or at least the pillows. Tonight's approach? Full sensory recalibration. Or, in Victorian terms, let the room cure you before the bed does. They called it atmospheric temperance, a fancy way of saying your environment should lull you to sleep before your thoughts ever get the chance. And so, you find yourself performing a gentle feng shui ritual, Victorian style, equal parts earnest science and charming nonsense. First, lighting. You dim the gas lamps, or in your case, maybe a bedside bulb pretending to be a gas lamp. Victorians believed in graduated darkness, a slow fade from firelight to moonshadow. Too sudden a change, and you risk eyeball confusion. Not a recognized condition today, but somehow you get it. Next, curtains. They must be drawn, but only to half-shadow the room, allowing in natural lunar softness without letting in damp air or moral decay. You're not entirely sure how curtains fend off sin, but the Victorians were confident on this. Then there's the issue of color. One Dr. Beasley, writing in 1871, claimed the ideal bedroom should include no hue more alarming than pale sage, which you interpret as an invitation to mentally repaint your walls. Goodbye off-white. Hello, sleepy celery. Temperature is next. You crack the window, just slightly. Victorians were huge fans of fresh air, though they feared it might sneak in bearing tuberculosis or radical political ideas. Still, a breeze was thought to cleanse the soul. And they were right about that. Tonight, It smells like rain and distant chimney smoke. Now, to the centerpiece, your pillow arrangement. You stack 2 pillows, then 3, then remove 1. Then tilt the remaining ones at a mild incline. Because, according to 19th century sleep evangelists, airflow must be channeled gently across the brow and not thud flat upon it. You're not sure what thudding air feels like, but you'd rather not find out. Your bed is now a small stage set for comfort, fluffed, spritzed with rose water, gently inclined like a Victorian fainting couch. And then comes the most mysterious touch, the bedroom soundscape. Long before white noise apps, Victorians dabbled in domestic lullabacoustics, an accidental portmanteau, perhaps, but a real idea. Some swore by the gentle creak of a rocking chair. Others mimicked the ticking of a large clock. One Londoner claimed he could only sleep if someone shuffled playing cards 2 rooms away. You opt for the closest approximation, a softly humming fan and a low loop of rain sounds. But in your mind, you add the imaginary creak of a wooden house settling. A carriage clip-clopping past. Maybe even a cat walking on a tin roof. The blend is oddly soothing. You're constructing an entire world, an old world, where sleep isn't fought for, but invited. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on room ambience was medically driven or a reflection of Victorian class anxieties, the idea that even at rest, your surroundings should reflect propriety and taste. But for you, it's just comforting. Even smell matters. We've already experimented with boiled apple. But tonight, you follow a tip from a mid-century almanac that swears by dried lemon peel and rosemary bundles tucked into pillowcases. You don't have rosemary, but you do have a tea bag with similar ambitions. Close enough. The result? Something citrusy and nostalgic, like summer tucked inside a drawer. And finally, there's sound. Victorians rarely had silence. Houses creaked. Radiators hissed. Horses neighed at inconvenient hours. So absolute silence, they believed, was unnatural, dangerous, even. A sign that death or guilt was near. So they preferred soft sound, not loud enough to distract, just enough to prove the world still turned. You lie back now. Pillow just so. Curtains parted by a sliver. Fan humming like a distant kettle. Teabag pillowcase beneath your cheek. And there it is, not sleep yet, but sleepishness, that drowsy middle place where thoughts blur at the edges and sounds begin to stretch. It's not just a room anymore. It's a cocoon. Not timeless, but time-slowed. The kind of space where your body, once so tightly wound, begins to trust that maybe, just maybe, you don't need to hold it all together tonight. Tonight you've decided to go all in. Not just on lettuce brews or spatial feng shui. No, tonight, you're embracing the full philosophy of Victorian sleep hygiene. A term not invented yet in their time, but certainly practiced, in a manner equal parts obsessive and oddly endearing. You start, as every well-regulated Victorian would, with a sleep diary. Or rather, what they called a nocturnal log of healthful temperament. Sounds impressive, right? In reality, it was a small notebook placed beside the bed where you might jot down what you ate for dinner, how many steps you took, whether you were brooding over your nephew's poor Latin marks, or if the moonlight hit your pillow too directly. So tonight, you write, supper, toasted bread, mild cheese, no pickled onions. Room, quiet, save for one raccoon outside. Mood, vaguely philosophical. Moon, cooperative. Because, as bizarre as it sounds, Victorians took their personal sleep statistics very seriously. It wasn't just a log, it was a self-improvement project. A nightly confession. A miniature scientific experiment, conducted with inky pens and slightly repressed optimism. Now that your record is secure, you proceed to the true oddity of the evening, the stone method. You read about it in an old pamphlet titled Rest and Reason, Christian Strategies for Slumber, which recommended placing a small, smooth pebble either under your tongue or beneath your pillow. Not both. That would be madness. Why? Because the pebble acted as a focus object meant to distract the nervous mind. It gave your thoughts a toy to play with until sleep stole in like a butler with soft shoes. Historians still argue whether this practice had religious roots or was simply folk superstition that gained enough upper-class polish to be rebranded as therapy. Tonight, you're going with beneath the pillow. The idea of accidentally swallowing a pebble in your sleep feels like a trip to a Victorian dentist, an experience best left to the imagination. You slip the pebble under the pillow's edge. It's smooth and river-washed, collected from a childhood hike you never meant to remember tonight, but here we are. The moment your head sinks down, you can feel its presence. Not uncomfortable, just there, like a secret. To balance this, you also try a technique from a Scottish naturalist travelogue, counting backward from 200 while naming breeds of domestic poultry between every 10th number. It's absurd. It's repetitive. It's perfect. 200. Sussex hen. 199. Silky. 198. Plymouth Rock. It's the bedtime equivalent of knitting clouds. You lose track around 183. Somewhere near a Buff Orpington. And now that your mind has softened, you're ready for the final Victorian flourish, the bedtime affirmation. Because while they weren't quite into modern positive vibes, Victorians did believe in morally structured self-talk. You're supposed to repeat something reassuring, not too prideful, not too melancholic. Something like, I have done my duty. Sleep now returns as my reward. You mumble it once. Then again, slower. You imagine some middle-aged squire with strong opinions on hay quality doing the same thing in 1843. You share a sleepy nod across time. The stone under your pillow shifts slightly. The affirmation echoes dully in your mind. You feel yourself floating, not quite asleep, not quite awake. Somewhere between Buff Orpington and moral victory. And here's the strangest part, it kind of works. This strange symphony of micro-rituals and tiny obsessions does what no amount of screen scrolling ever could. It tells your brain, in a dozen quiet ways, you're done now. You've set the scene, taken notes, said the line. The day can close. The curtain can fall. Outside, the raccoon rustles again. You note it absently. Maybe he's on his own journey toward Victorian wellness. You make a mental note to log that in the diary tomorrow. Unscheduled nocturnal fauna encounter. But for now, you let the thought pass. The pebble is cool, the sheets still faintly scented with that sleep tea from earlier, and somewhere in the distant theater of your thoughts, a tiny chicken struts across a stage and bows. By the 10th night, you're no longer dabbling. You're practically a certified practitioner of the absurdly charming world of Victorian sleep science. Tonight's feature? The sensory reset. Or as one 1860s pamphlet dramatically called it, a recalibration of the nervous constitution by means of moderate temperature, mild friction, and pleasant distraction. Translation? Rub your arms, warm your feet, and gently confuse yourself into sleep. You begin, as many Victorians did, with the foot ritual. Cold feet were considered a leading cause of not just insomnia but also melancholy, digestive stagnation, and moral listlessness. The solution? Foot bricks. No, you don't have an actual Victorian ceramic foot warmer filled with hot coals. But you do have a microwavable sock filled with rice. Same principle. safer result. You press it to your feet and imagine the warmth seeping up into your spine like polite lava. Some women of the time even wore heated boots, awkward inventions stuffed with sand or metal plates. Of course, most of them couldn't walk far in those. But that was the point, you weren't meant to walk. You were meant to recline. As your feet warm, you move to the next stage, mild friction. That meant dry brushing the skin lightly to stimulate circulation and create a soothing tingle. You grab the nearest modern substitute, a soft towel or loofah, and give your arms a quick, gentle rub. It's not luxurious, but it works. You can almost hear the echo of a Victorian governess instructing, upward strokes, never across the grain. Think of the lymph. This might sound a bit fussy, but according to the charming Dr. Wimbledon Gray, yes, that was his actual name, the best remedy for nerves was a body made conscious of its own soothing. Historians still argue whether these tactile treatments were rooted in genuine medical insight or simply an excuse to sell linen brushes at marked-up prices. Either way, they sure beat doom-scrolling under fluorescent lights. Now that your body feels like a gently toasted marshmallow, you're ready for the final element of tonight's ritual, pleasant distraction. This is where Victorian minds got truly inventive. They weren't content with mere counting or prayers. No, they developed elaborate mental landscapes, daydreams by gaslight. One popular method? Mental journeying. You'd pick a familiar route, say, the walk from your cottage to the mill, and replay it in perfect detail. The turn by the apple tree, the way the gravel crunched, the smell of damp hay by the fence. And so, tonight, you embark on your own mental journey. Maybe it's a walk through your childhood neighborhood. Maybe it's a grocery store or an imaginary Victorian greenhouse filled with things you've never grown. You walk slowly, naming things, noticing textures, opening invisible gates. Some Victorian writers swore by alphabetical object walking. You'd move through an imaginary garden and find something beginning with each letter. Anemone, bluebell, chamomile, dandelion, echinacea. You stop at J. J is hard. You imagine a jug filled with sleepy tea. That'll do. The point is not to reach Z. It's to become so gently lost in the act of naming that your brain lets go of everything else. The unpaid bills, the forgotten text messages, the slightly embarrassing comment you made in a meeting 5 years ago. One mid-century sleep manual suggested building a dream cottage in your mind and furnishing each room with memories from childhood. You imagine a small parlor, filled with overstuffed chairs and mismatched mugs. One contains the letter's potion. Another, the faint scent of rosemary pillow. The walls are painted that same pale sage from earlier. The wind outside is imaginary, but consistent. And there's a small stone tucked under the guest bed's pillow, just in case. Everything loops back, doesn't it? In the same way your thoughts tonight do, curling around warm feet, tingling arms, gentle distractions, until there's nothing left to do but let the whole scene fade gently into a restful blur. Tonight, you face a restless hum beneath your skin, the kind the Victorians would call nervous excitation brought about by spiritual or dietary excess. In your case, probably just that third cup of afternoon tea. But they treat it all the same. So, you turn to their strangest solution yet, the pre-sleep constitutional. No, not a grand political document. A walk. A very slow, very purposeful, very aimless walk, taken just before bed to discharge the sparks of the day, as one pamphlet rather dramatically put it. And so, you pace. Bare feet on bedroom floor. Each step is slow, deliberate, and vaguely ridiculous, like you're preparing to deliver a monologue in a velvet dressing gown. This is not exercise. This is sleep choreography. Victorians believed a 10-minute walk indoors, just back and forth across the same creaky floorboards, could recalibrate your digestive magnetism and coax your thoughts into obedient quiet. Some swore by walking in circles. Others preferred figure eights. One eccentric vicar apparently paced in the shape of a lowercase g every night, claiming it matched the rhythm of his breath. You stick to a simple line tonight. From door to window. Window to door. Turn. Repeat. There's something monkish about it. And as your feet grow accustomed to the rhythm, your mind begins to shuffle off its coat. You begin to notice things. The way the rug catches your heel. The tiny whistle of wind squeezing past the window frame. That faint lavender note still clinging to the pillowcase. Then, at exactly the right moment, when the body sighs and the mind slumps into second gear, you stop walking and return to bed. But sleep still doesn't come. And here, the Victorians had a backup. A final resort trick so peculiar, it feels like it shouldn't work, the waking dream script. Here's how it goes. You lie flat, eyes closed. You imagine a door in front of you, any door. Maybe it's wooden and old, maybe it's glass and glowing. You open it. And whatever's behind it, that's your story for the night. Some Victorians would imagine gardens they'd never seen. Some created fictional dinner parties where they were always the wittiest guest. Others pictured walking down staircases into candlelit libraries, each book containing a happy memory they hadn't thought of in years. You imagine a train station. The steam curls like lace. Your ticket is warm in your palm. No destination listed, just a departure time, soon. You board the train. There's no rush. No crowd. Just you and the gentle clatter of wheels over tracks that lead. Well, it doesn't matter, does it? This was the key, not solving a problem, not replaying a conversation, not mentally writing tomorrow's to-do list. Just a story with no plot, no pressure, and no end. The very opposite of modern insomnia. Historians still debate whether these waking dream methods were self-hypnosis, prototherapy, or just wishful thinking from people with too many wool blankets and not enough distractions. But as the train picks up speed and the landscape blurs into a gray-green softness, you begin to understand their devotion. You don't need to make it to the end of the ride. You don't even need to remember where it started. The dream is the door. Sleep is the track. You're already on your way. And in the faint distance, you hear a rooster. Or maybe it's just that buff Orpington again, strutting through your thoughts. It's a foggy sort of evening, the kind where the corners of the room feel a little blurred, like a watercolor left out in the rain. Perfect, then, for one of the most peculiar Victorian beliefs, that certain colors could induce sleep. Welcome to the world of chromatic slumber theory. Yes, really. According to some 19th century thinkers, color wasn't just about taste or fashion, it directly influenced the vibratory rate of the human nervous system. Blue soothed the mind. Red agitated it. Pale green whispered you toward unconsciousness. Historians still argue whether this was based on early optics experiments or just a collective case of nighttime synesthesia. So, tonight, you conduct a bit of your own chromatic therapy. Your room, luckily, is dim enough that everything has taken on that soft blue-gray tint of evening. But you add to it. You toss a blue scarf over a bedside lamp. You drape a green towel across the foot of the bed. You turn your screen brightness down to 0 and let the shadows do their work. Victorians loved blue bedrooms. Not the navy or cobalt of modern designers, but soft, misty blues that made you feel like you were sleeping inside a cloud. They believed the color quieted what they called mental agitations of the sanguine type. Translation: overthinking, anxiety, or reading too many tragic novels before bed. And for all their love of blue, they despised yellow in sleep spaces. In sight's alertness, one manual warned: suitable only for postmen and melancholics. You make a note to move that sunflower painting in the morning, just in case. Now that the visual scene is right, you settle deeper into the blankets and reach for tonight's most delightfully strange edition, Victorian sleep audio. Obviously, they didn't have white noise machines or rainfall YouTube loops. But they had something arguably better: clockwork lullabies. Mechanical music boxes, often nestled in wooden cases the size of sewing machines, played gentle melodies with teeth and pins and slow-turning gears. The hum was imperfect, slightly tinny, but soothing, like a lullaby played by a thoughtful robot. You imagine yours now, just off to the side. It's playing something like Greensleeves, slightly off-tempo, a bit fuzzy on the high notes. Maybe you wound it too tight. Doesn't matter. The imperfection makes it real. Some Victorian parents believed that exposing babies to mechanical lullabies helped synchronize their heartbeat with the tempo of sleep. A few went further, arguing that the key of the melody, C major for security, F sharp minor for emotional release, affected not just mood but dream content. You smile. It's entirely possible they made this up on the spot. But also, what if it's true? You begin to hum, softly, as though joining the imaginary music box in duet. The act slows your breath. Your chest loosens. Your thoughts, too, begin to drift, not unpleasantly, but like little paper boats released one by one into a quiet stream. Another Victorian method suggested whispering nonsensical phrases as you fell asleep, things like violet clock chimneys or whale feather harmonium. The idea wasn't to make sense, but to short-circuit logic. Let go of structure. Invite your brain into its dream pajamas. So you try it. Cabbage feather orchestra, you whisper. Muffin church window. You giggle once, just a puff of breath, and then let the silliness sink into the mattress with you. The color of the room is somewhere between smoke and silver. Your phantom music box whirs. Your nonsense chant floats in the air like lazy steam. And you, dear time traveler, feel yourself teetering on the edge of sleep, holding the hem of some velvet dream just beginning to unfold. Tonight's ritual begins not with movement or music, but with the tongue, a part of the body the Victorians were oddly obsessed with when it came to sleep. Yes, you heard that right. The tongue. See, in the late 1800s, certain sleep theorists, especially those in the more spiritual or fringe medical communities, believed that positioning the tongue properly was essential to securing restful slumber. A loose tongue is the source of a restless mind, warned one delightfully dramatic tract by a Mr. J. Swindlehurst, Esquire, real name, we promise. So tonight, you try it their way. Close your mouth gently. Let the tip of your tongue rest just behind your front teeth, not pressing, just hovering like it's shy. Breathe slowly through your nose. And feel how, strangely, your jaw seems to unclench in response. Whether this is science or sheer suggestion doesn't matter. It feels good. Victorian manuals referred to this position as the golden posture of the tongue. Why golden? Probably because it sounded fancy. But they believed it prevented what they called chattering nerves, those spirals of half-thoughts that skitter through the brain when you should be drifting. And speaking of brains, let's talk about the pineal gland. You may know it today as a pea-sized blob in the middle of your skull. But to Victorians, especially those dabbling in theosophy, mesmerism, and other delightful pseudosciences, it was the seat of the soul, the doorway to sleep, and the gland that held all the keys to your nightly peace. Some sleep enthusiasts swore that gently massaging the center of your forehead before bed activated the slumber gate. Others insisted on sunbathing that spot during the day to charge it. Of course, historians still argue whether these beliefs stemmed from early understandings of melatonin production, or whether people were just bored and touching their foreheads for lack of hobbies. Still, you give it a try. You press 2 fingers to the space just between your brows. Not hard. Just enough to feel warmth. You make small circles. Your eyelids twitch, maybe. You breathe out a little longer. It doesn't unlock any magical gates, but something in your body loosens, as though it was waiting for you to remember it existed. Now you've got tongue in position, forehead relaxed. The next Victorian trick might surprise you: deliberate non-blinking. Yes, they had a method called the wide-lidded gaze, where you would lie still and try not to blink for as long as possible. The idea? Fatigue the eyelids into surrender. It sounds silly, because it is, but it worked for more people than you'd think. So you try. You stare at the ceiling. Not intensely. Just there. Eyes open, a bit glassy. Like a cat pretending not to nap. And then, after maybe 20 seconds, your eyelids flutter shut. Not because you made them, but because they wanted to. Victory. One more tool in your ever-growing toolkit of obsolete wisdom. Then, finally, we arrive at one of the strangest and strangely calming ideas of all: the Victorian dream ritual. They believed you could plant dreams, like a garden, that by visualizing a specific image before sleep, you could encourage your brain to grow it into a full experience. Popular seeds included a silver boat on a green lake, a glowing hallway lined with books, a door that opened into the scent of oranges. Simple, sensory, gently surreal. So tonight, you plant your own. You imagine an orchard at night. The trees are low and full, the air thick with moonlight. Beneath one tree, a single glowing jar of honey sits in the grass. You walk toward it. Slowly. There is no urgency. The grass hushes under your feet. A nightbird flutters, briefly, then stills. The trees sway once, then hold their breath. That's it. That's the whole image. You don't chase it. You just leave it there. Like a bedtime snack for your unconscious to find later. And as you pull the covers closer, your tongue in its golden posture, your pineal gland softly humming with placebo energy, your eyelids warm and heavy, you smile. Because this is working. Not because the science is sound or the methods are modern, but because you've made room for stillness, however absurd the doorways to it may be. You wake up briefly, just long enough to adjust the blanket that's tangled at your feet, and consider, groggily, one last Victorian sleep habit: perfumed handkerchiefs on the pillow. A simple idea, really. Before the invention of mass-produced sleep aids, the Victorians turned to scent. But not the cloying sachets or overpowering potions you might expect. No, they preferred subtle. A whisper of smell, folded neatly into linen and tucked beneath the cheek. You reach for yours, real or imagined. Tonight's handkerchief smells faintly of crushed lettuce leaves and lavender. 2 Victorian favorites. Lettuce, they insisted, had a sedative property, mildly hypnotic, said one herbalist, especially when steeped in warm water or pressed gently against the skin. Historians still debate whether it was the plant itself or simply the ritual of preparation that did the trick. But lavender? That one stood the test of time. So you tuck the handkerchief under your chin. The scent blooms in the darkness, green, herbal, slightly bitter, with a floral hum like old lace stored in a cedar chest. You inhale slowly. And again. And feel something inside you, not quite unlock, but maybe soften. Victorian households took sleep scenting seriously. Some burned herbs in the fireplace. Others misted the sheets with rose water. One enthusiastic baronet was rumored to keep a different scented pillowcase for every day of the week, ranging from peppermint on Mondays to reset the nerves, to chamomile on Fridays for proper Sabbath preparation. You wonder idly what he did on Sundays. Probably nap-scented laudanum. But more curious still was the Victorian fascination with ozone. Yes, ozone. That fresh, slightly metallic smell that rolls in after a thunderstorm. Some Victorians believed it was the very breath of sleep itself. They tried to trap it indoors, building contraptions meant to recreate that post-storm crispness. A few inventors even marketed ozone pillows, stuffed with wool soaked in diluted hydrogen peroxide and bound in rubber-lined flannel. They were supposed to simulate storm air. In reality, they mostly smelled like damp laundry and mild chemicals. But the idea was oddly charming, that the smell of rain, even fake rain, could rock you to sleep. Tonight, your version is simpler. A cracked window, just an inch. Enough to let in the cool night air, damp from some earlier breeze. It smells faintly of earth, of distant leaves, of chimney smoke curling in the dark. There's no real ozone in the room, but your imagination fills in the gaps. That's always been its gift. And what better moment to revisit your old friend, the Pebble ritual. Yes, we're back to Pebbles. You remember, the smooth, river-rounded stones kept in a small dish at the bedside. Their original purpose was, hilariously, to ground the wandering spirit. But by now, they've become something more. Tonight, you reach for one. It's cool to the touch, smaller than your palm, with a satisfying weight. You hold it against your chest, beneath the blanket. No mysticism. Just something real. Something that won't glow or buzz or ask for a password. This was the unspoken genius of the Victorian sleep philosophy, the belief that objects could carry peace. Not in the consumer sense, not bought, not flaunted, but imbued with personal ritual. A sleep stone, a lettuce-scented handkerchief, a quiet walk before bed. It wasn't about results. It was about readiness. So, you lie there now, wrapped in your own slightly absurd version of this century-old bedtime. Your eyelids grow heavy again. The scent of greens and petals drifts faintly past your nose. The stone warms in your hand. And a single breeze sneaks through the window, brushes your cheek, and leaves without a sound. That dream orchard still waits somewhere behind your eyes. And in the distance, perhaps from another room in time, you hear the ghost of a music box playing its crooked lullaby. There's something satisfyingly final about this last stretch of the night, the moment when your body is no longer negotiating sleep, but simply sliding into it. You've tried the lettuce, the pebbles, the whispered nonsense phrases. You've stared into the faux ozone gloom of your room and thought seriously, if only for a second, about the golden posture of your tongue. Now, at the end of your sleepy time travel through the quirks of Victorian bedtime, there's just one more quiet ritual to visit, the art of mental bedtime embroidery. No, not actual embroidery, though that, too, was a nighttime hobby for many Victorian women and men, if no one was looking. This was a form of mental imagery they used before falling asleep, what one manual quaintly described as gentle needlework for the brain. It worked like this: pick a single image or memory and mentally stitch it. Add to it, detail by detail. Imagine the edges, the textures, the fabric beneath. No need to get it perfect. You're not making a masterpiece. Just passing the time until your thoughts sow themselves into dreams. Tonight, you begin with a slipper. Yes, a slipper. Velvet, let's say, lined with silk. Possibly the sort worn by a governess who once taught Latin to someone very rich, very pale, and perpetually nervous. You picture its edges. A fraying bow. A scuffed sole. A monogram that might be an M or a W depending on the angle. And then you place that slipper on the floor of a grand Victorian bedroom. The room grows around it. A faded carpet. A long mirror with cloudy corners. A nightstand with a candle that's been snuffed out and still curls with the scent of beeswax and smoke. The bed is tall and half-made. A linen nightgown is draped over the headboard like it forgot how to hang properly. On the dresser, someone's left a tiny notebook of sleep records. 3 hours, one page says. No dreams again. The handwriting is crooked, rushed, perhaps the product of insomnia or just poor eyesight. And you are standing in the doorway, half dreaming this room into being. Each detail appears not because it must, but because your mind has asked gently enough. Victorian bedtime was often lonely, despite all the rituals. Big rooms, cold walls, long nights, sometimes just the soft hiss of a coal stove to keep someone company. So tonight, you lend a little warmth back. You tuck the imagined covers around the slipper wearer. You fluff their pillow. You set their sleep pebble beside them and fold the lettuce-infused handkerchief with care. And in doing so, you calm your own body. Your own breath slows. Your limbs feel not heavy, exactly, but settled, like a collection of old books on a trusted shelf. And now we drift into the quiet part of the night, where nothing needs to happen, where no clocks matter, where your thoughts can unravel not in panic, but like threads loosened from a soft spool, one gentle loop at a time. You're still here, in this imaginary bed, beneath a wool blanket that smells faintly of lavender and thyme. The fire has gone low. The shutters creak a little in the breeze, but not enough to wake anyone. Even the shadows seem to exhale, to release themselves across the floor in lazy shapes. You might dream tonight, or you might not. Both are fine. There's no pressure here. Just a floating sensation, like resting on a lake with your ears underwater, half hearing the world, half surrendered to it. Your body knows what to do. The pulse slows. The breath deepens. The jaw softens. And somewhere, beneath all that stillness, your brain releases its last little buzz of wakefulness, like a candle finally flickering out. Maybe your dreams will be strange. A pebble turns into a boat. A lettuce leaf becomes a letter from a long-lost friend. Maybe you'll wake and remember none of it. That's okay. You've given yourself this moment. You've built it from color and scent and silliness and tenderness. Victorian or not, this is what sleep really is. A ritual of kindness, performed slowly, and for no one but you. Rest well now.